teacups, what's brewing? Welcome back to the channel. I got a bat signal from Twitter. So Foodie said something in her recent car driving live about her visa, and I had a few people on Twitter clip it and then tag me asking for the milk tea notoriety services. So here I am, at your command. So I'm just going to put a little clip of what Foodie said.
People just want to see you high acting crazy. Yeah, that's not my life anymore. It's not ever going to be my life anymore. Inshallah, I am going to be in the Middle East for at least a few years. So, yeah, that's it. I'm not going to talk about my visa and all that, but basically I'll be a resident and I won't have to worry about traveling back and forth. It's just, the journey is just way too hard on me. It's not something that I enjoy doing really regularly. Every 3 months, it's too much. And I don't like to leave without my husband. And we just have a lot of plans here, so.
Now, obviously we don't have very much information, but very clearly stating she wants to be there for years, not months, years, which is more than she would be able to achieve on a tourist visa. A repeated tourist visa would be detected long before then, I believe. And that she seemed quite confident in getting her residency permit, her civil ID. And we have discussed that at length before, that she doesn't have one and she can't get one at the moment. Now, as we've discussed before on the channel, a couple of the paths she's got to getting a civil ID would include employment, which she has not gone through the measures for, and would be being legally married, which, as we have discussed, I do not believe she is. Obviously, since our last discussion, Murad has had that interview saying, no, it was a temporary marriage. And the thing with the temporary marriage is, the very point of it is, yes, okay, it stops you being arrested, but it doesn't give the rights of a full legal wife. And one of those rights is the right to live together. So they still shouldn't be doing that. And I'm not quite sure how they're getting away with it. Now, when Murad was having the interview he did, he mentioned that they were currently petitioning the court, trying to get the temporary marriage, converted into a full traditional marriage. And I believe Foodie went and got like her proof of no impediment or whatever while she was in Canada, but I might be misremembering that. Now, in order for her to do that, essentially, the court would have to make an exception. She would have to argue a case that there's a good enough reason that she shouldn't go through the proper channels to be married the way she's supposed to be married. And I don't see her having a good enough reason, quite frankly, but that's up to her lawyer to argue, and we shall see. I do have my doubts though. There's a reason they make you jump through all the hoops to make sure you can come into the country, and I can't think of a compelling reason why they would allow her not to do them. But for the sake of the argument, let's say somehow she did manage to get her marriage recognised as a full traditional marriage and everything that came with it. Her options then do actually widen quite significantly. So it's actually really common among teaching staff for them to have to sponsor their families to come into the country after they settle there, because obviously you're going to be there quite a long time. You don't want to leave your family behind. Now, the laws differ from Middle Eastern country to Middle Eastern country. In Saudi, a woman could sponsor her husband. In Oman, and I believe in Kuwait, she can't. It has to be a man sponsoring a woman, which usually means for teaching purposes, you have to hire both of them, or it just has to be the man. Otherwise, the woman's not going to be able to bring family over. In her case, it's really not important because Salah would be the one sponsoring her anyhow. So when you're actually employed, your employer is your sponsor. And then when you arrive, they will usually assist you in becoming a sponsor for your family. So your employer does not sponsor your family, you do. It's an extra step. And how much assistance they give you with this is really on a case-by-case basis. If, quite a big if, they could come up with some kind of legal status that was actually recognized within Kuwait, Salah could sponsor Foodie on what's known as a dependent visa. And that means basically you come in, I take full financial responsibility for you, you don't have the right to work, but it allows you to stay. And that in turn allows her to get like a civil ID or what have you. Now, there are a couple of impediments here. One is obviously the recognition of their married status, which is currently up in the air. Certainly not done yet because she's still on a tourist visa. But apparently there are loopholes, you guys, so we'll see how successful those are. I doubt Foodie will be able to explain it well because when asked, she didn't seem to know what she had done. 2, Foodie would have to apply for this while she was outside of Kuwait. And now that she's given up her place to live and all of her independence in Canada for the sake of coming back, it's going to be quite awkward. Certainly not impossible. If her family could stand her for long enough, she could definitely go live with one of them. She's made it more difficult for herself, which is obviously not a shock because that's kind of her MO. If I were going to say it's her brand, God, she makes life hard for herself is basically it. But she's made it more difficult for herself because she now doesn't have an independent place to live. And so waiting out this process would be harder. As I say, not impossible. If her family were willing to step in and give her a space, not impossible. But given that she was considering a hotel for the last few days in Canada even, I wonder how long she could maintain that. What I don't understand about this whole marriage thing, let's say, no, you for real, you need to get legally recognized marriage, which they do need to do. Why are they doing this in such a difficult way? Why don't they both leave the country? They both go somewhere else and get married that's not in the Middle East, somewhere that will recognize a civil marriage, and then get that marriage certificate recognized and just present it in Kuwait, get it attested. As long as it's a legal marriage certificate wherever they got married, they'd be fine. Of course, this does mean that Foodie would have to be registered as married in Canada, and that would definitely impact like her taxes, her bankruptcies, I'm guessing, because I said definitely, and then I'm like, I'm guessing. It would make sense to me that it would impact those things because her debts would become their debts, wouldn't they? Which maybe is the reason she's not doing it, I don't know. But register the marriage, get it attested for Kuwait, and just present it and essentially have it converted or recognized in Kuwait and save yourself all this hassle. But that doesn't seem to be what they're doing. But anyway, assuming that they manage to do that in some way, shape or form, the dependent visa would require a few things. It requires a minimum salary from Salah. We don't know what he makes, but I'm assuming he could do it. It says for private sector employees, a person must earn 650 KD monthly, which is about $2,100. I don't know what the rates for employment for a non-specialized job would be, but apparently he's employed through the perfumery, so I don't know how much that makes. Obviously enough to keep him and Foodie somewhere, but then they've also talked about having cheaper rent and things like that. So I don't know where they are on the salary side of things. I know that Foodie does earn money through YouTube, even if it's dwindling slightly. But for this, Salah would have to prove his salary because the point is that she would be dependent on him, whether she's earning money in Canada or not. He would have to prove he had enough to take care of her. Chantal would also have to do some things which she would have to do after she entered the country, so she couldn't just be there on a tourist visa while they go through this, I don't think. Or at least, I suppose she could hang out on the tourist visa and then when they kind of got their ducks in a row, leave and then spend as little time as possible and come back. She would have to undergo medical tests and she'd have to have her fingerprints taken. That's fairly standard. It's unlikely her general terrible health would exclude her from coming into the country. It's more for things like sexually transmitted diseases, which I know, touchy subject in Foodie Land, but it's more for like bloodborne diseases, things they don't want spreading. It's very, very unlikely you'll get any type of visa if you're HIV positive, that kind of thing. There's some paperwork that Foodie would have to send copies of that he could submit to the office. I never pronounce this right. It's Jalazat, something like that. I think it's Jalazat. It's one of the government bureaus, and it's usually where you go for all the stuff. And actually in Saudi Arabia for quite a long time, women couldn't go in. You had to send somebody. They can now, but usually you have to send like a driver to do it for you or whatever, or a husband, but you know, I don't have one, so. Luckily, the school knew this and they'd usually just send people on your behalf. The one thing that did puzzle me about this information that I found was it said photocopy of dependent's passport, very standard. Salary certificate of the sponsor, yep, if you're saying they're going to be dependent on you, you'd have to meet the minimums. Copy of the dependent's civil ID. I feel like either potentially that's a typo on the website and they mean the sponsor's civil ID, which Salah has, or perhaps sometimes you start doing this, you come into the country, you finish doing it. So for the process to be complete, after you've entered country, you would get the civil ID and then you would submit it, so they had a copy. I'm not sure what it means here, but she wouldn't have the civil ID till after she had arrived. And this one here, the marriage or childbirth certificate is authenticated by the sponsor's embassy in their home country. So regardless, Foodie would have to return to Canada to do this. I don't know if they would allow her to maybe do it in an embassy in a different country, but they have specifically said home country here. So she'd need to make at least a temporary visit. But if we look at it technically, assuming they could prove a legal marriage, it would be possible for her to be sponsored by Salah. It would still take time, it would still cost some. There are usually yearly fees involved with maintaining it, so you have to pay for that sponsorship and keep paying for it. And Foodie would have to declare quite a lot to the Canadian government that I'm guessing she hasn't yet declared. I don't think they know she's planning on staying abroad at all because she's on a tourist visa. Why would they? And I don't think she probably wants a change in status to interfere with any of the problems she's got going on back home. And even if she had none of those, I just don't think she wants to deal with the paperwork. It's a little bit complicated, she's kind of lazy, and she'd much rather just not do it. But their choices are limited, so it's a case of how badly does she want it, or is she just going to try her luck until she's caught? I have my suspicions which one she's going to go with, but until she confirms them, I will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.